When my wife walked into the house that night, the place was shrouded in darkness. I sat silently in the living room. The only sound was the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. She froze when she saw me, surprised, maybe even a little frightened. She knew I was supposed to be working the night shift at the hospital. She's always known my schedule, down to the minute. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to hide the unease in her voice. "You scared me half to death." She flicked on the light, her irritation evident. Without waiting for my response, she started toward the bedroom, probably eager to slip out of her clothes and relax after what she thought had been a carefully planned day. "Sit down," I said, my tone flat and cold, stopping her in her tracks. "We need to talk." She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing slightly as she sensed something wasn't right. My life had already been shattered by her betrayal, and tonight, I was going to ensure she felt the same pain. "Did you visit your sister's house today?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside me. "Yes," she answered, coolly and without hesitation. That same calmness used to be one of the things I loved about her, how she could remain composed under pressure. But now it only made me sick to my stomach. "Take off your coat," I said, my eyes never leaving hers. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt cross her face. "Why? What's going on?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness. "When I tell you to take off your coat, you take it off," I barked, the sharpness of my voice causing her to flinch. She hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she slowly unbuttoned her coat and let it slip from her shoulders. Underneath, she was wearing that dress, the one she wore on our first anniversary and countless other date nights. It hugged her body in all the right places, a dress that used to drive me wild. Now it just fueled my rage. Who was she really dressing up for? This dress. "You wore this when we used to go out on special nights. And today, you wore it to your sister's house?" I asked, my voice low but laced with bitterness. She blinked, a bit taken aback but still holding on to her calm demeanor. "Yes," she said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Just to your sister's house?" I pressed, knowing full well she was lying to my face. "Yes," she repeated, but I saw the slight tremor in her voice now, the tiny crack in her facade. She was starting to realize that I knew more than she thought. "Why are you asking me this?" she added, a bit more forcefully, trying to regain control of the situation. I leaned forward, letting the tension hang in the air. "Because earlier today, you made a reservation at that fancy restaurant on the other side of town. You weren't just at your sister's house, were you?" Her face drained of color, and I saw her confidence falter. I did go to the restaurant, but how did you know?" I glanced at her hand, where her wedding ring should have been. "It wasn't there. You went with your sister's husband, didn't you?" I asked, the words feeling like poison in my mouth. She looked down at her empty hand, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, but you know how devastated he's been since she passed away. I was just trying to comfort him, to help him through it." "And where's your wedding ring?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. She fumbled for an excuse, her eyes wide as she looked down at her bare finger. I took it off when I went to the bathroom," she stammered, but the lie was as thin as ice. "Oh, really?" I said, the rage bubbling up inside me. "Or did you take it off so that it wouldn't scratch him when you were touching his leg?" Her composure shattered, and she stepped back, her face twisted in fear and guilt. "Were you at the restaurant? How long were you watching us?" she stuttered, the panic fully setting in now. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photos I had taken. Each one was a dagger to my heart. Pictures of them sitting close, laughing, her hand resting on his thigh, his hand brushing a stray hair from her face. I had watched them, my stomach turning with each passing minute, but I stayed, needing the proof to confront her. She stared at the photos, her face crumpling as the last of her defenses fell away. "It's not what it looks like," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I was just trying to comfort him. You know how lost he's been since she died. Maybe there was a little too much contact, but it didn't mean anything. I swear nothing happened. I didn't do anything wrong." "Not really." But I wasn't done yet. "Oh, really?" I said, my voice cold and unforgiving. "So, the 3 nights a week you've been spending at that motel with him were just a bit of extra comfort?" Her face went ashen, and she began to shake uncontrollably. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hands trembling as she tried to reach out to me. The fear in her eyes was something I had never seen before, and in some twisted way, I found satisfaction in it. "You know everything, don't you?" She finally broke down, her voice a mix of despair and guilt. I'm so sorry. After my sister died, we were both so lost. I was helping him with her son, and then we just slipped into it. I leaned in close, my voice a deadly whisper. Calm down, honey. This is just the beginning of our night. She misinterpreted my tone as forgiveness, and hope flickered in her eyes. She stood up quickly, trying to embrace me, to hold on to whatever chance she thought she had left. Let's start over, please. We can fix this. I shoved her away, pulling out another piece of paper, a paternity test. Her face turned ghostly white, her whole body shaking like a leaf in the wind. We had been married for years, and despite our best efforts, we never had children. We'd both been tested, and there was no reason we couldn't conceive. But she always said it didn't matter, that as long as we had each other, we were enough. What is this? She asked, her voice barely audible, her eyes wide with terror. I shoved the report in front of her, my hands shaking with rage. This is for your nephew, or should I say, your son? She collapsed onto the floor, her strength gone, her eyes filling with tears as the truth crushed her spirit. I watched her, feeling a strange mix of anger, pain, and satisfaction as I saw her crumble before me. I'll give you a chance, I said, my voice cold and devoid of any sympathy. Why don't you tell me the whole story? I'm getting tired of talking to myself. She cried for what felt like an eternity, her sobs echoing through the room. I just watched detached as if I was watching a stranger. Finally, after what felt like hours, her sobs began to fade. She looked up at me, her face a mess of smeared makeup and raw, red eyes. Before I met you, she began, her voice barely a whisper, my sister was already married. You know how much she meant to me, how I was always the one taking care of her. Even when we were little, she was so fragile, always in and out of hospitals. Everyone was worried she wouldn't make it past childhood. But she was a fighter. She survived, even when the doctors said she wouldn't. And when she finally got married, it felt like a miracle, a small victory after so many battles. Her voice broke, and she took a shaky breath. We were all so happy for her. She had found someone who loved her, who didn't care about her illness, who promised to take care of her no matter what. But that happiness didn't last. She got sick again. Worse this time. I was there every day, holding her hand, watching her fade away piece by piece. She paused, her eyes unfocused, lost in the past. One night, when she was at her weakest, she told me something that shattered my heart. She said her biggest regret was that she would never give her husband a child, that she would never leave behind a piece of herself in this world. Her voice was so weak, so full of sorrow. She looked at me with those eyes that had already seen too much pain, and she begged me to give him the child she never could. She choked on the words, her hands gripping the hem of her dress so tightly that her knuckles turned white. At first I refused. How could I even consider something like that? It felt wrong. But she was my sister, my only sister, and she was dying. She told me it was her last wish, and then the whole family got involved. They all begged me, told me it was the right thing to do, that it was what she wanted, what she needed to find peace. She closed her eyes, the tears streaming down her face again. But she continued, driven by some desperate need to confess it all. In the end, I gave in. How could I not? I convinced myself it was just a few times, just enough to give her what she wanted, and then it would be over. So we did it, and when I got pregnant, we stopped. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I could just go back to my life, to our life, and forget that it ever happened. But nothing was ever the same after that. And then I met you, and you were so good to me. The rest you already knew. She paused, gripping my shirt as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Can you forgive me? I did it for my sister. I stared at her for a long moment, feeling the cold fury rising inside me. Oh, just for her? I asked, my voice laced with disbelief and anger. Then why were you still together after the boy turned 5? Don't lie to me anymore. You've been cheating on me for the entire 3 years we've been married, haven't you? She flinched as if I had struck her, the color draining from her face. Her mouth opened, but no words came out, only a strangled gasp as she struggled to find an excuse. Finally, she stammered, it's a mistake. My sister couldn't take care of him. Of her husband. So I had to step in and keep him happy in their marriage. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned by the sheer absurdity of her explanation. And then, I did something I hadn't expected. I laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound that echoed through the room, a laugh born of anger and disbelief. Oh, really? Then what's this? I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, familiar bottle, a bottle of asthma inhaler. Her eyes widened in panic, but she tried to keep her composure. What's that? You don't have asthma, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. She stammered, it's for my sister. She had asthma. I always carried it for her. Oh, really? I said, leaning in so close I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. You're still not telling the truth. What really happened the day your sister died? She broke down into uncontrollable sobs, her whole body shaking as the weight of her lies came crashing down around her. But I wasn't going to let her off that easily. Should I finish the story? I asked, my voice low and menacing. She mumbled a few words, but they were incoherent. She was lost, broken, and completely at my mercy. Your sister caught you that day, right? She was heartbroken, and she threatened to expose you. So you both did something, didn't you? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, it wasn't like that. She got out of bed and saw us kissing. It was an accident. We never thought she was strong enough to get up. They had an argument, and he pushed her to the ground. She was so upset that it triggered her asthma. I tried to find her inhaler, but her husband stopped me. It was only 2 minutes. I didn't know it would. The room was filled with her sobs, the weight of her confession hanging in the air like a dark cloud. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted, was now a stranger, a liar, and a murderer. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. What are you going to do? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I looked at her, my heart cold and unfeeling. I recorded everything. The law will decide your fate. And don't worry, your lover won't be forgotten. The police will be paying him a visit too. She stared at me, her eyes wide with horror, as the full realization of what I had done sank in. Her life, as she knew it, was over. But before she could say anything else, I pulled out my phone, showing her an email that changed everything. I just have one question, she whispered, her voice trembling. How did you find all of this out? I looked her straight in the eye, the truth burning on my tongue. Your sister. She was suspecting everything for quite a while. She sent me this email 1 week before she passed away, asking me to kindly pay attention to you two for her. She knew something was wrong, and now I know too. The last remnants of hope drained from her eyes, leaving her a hollow shell. I watched as the woman I once loved crumbled before me, and I felt a strange sense of closure, but also an emptiness that I knew would never go away.